If you've been scrolling through endless lists of spotting scopes, watching video after video trying to decide whether you need a heavy-duty bird-watching rig or something you can sling over your shoulder on a weekend hike, you're not alone. The market is crowded, the marketing terms are confusing, and the fear of spending a lot of money on a piece of glass that ends up sitting dusty on a shelf is real. That hesitation is why I'm breaking it down today. I've spent the last few weeks actually taking the SWAROVSKI OPTIK AT Endura out into the field, testing it on a sunrise birding trip, a late afternoon deer stand, and even a quick backyard astronomy session. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, this isn't a one-size-fits-all scope that tries to be everything for everyone. It's marketed as an all-round performer, and that description only makes sense if you understand what you'll be using it for. The Endura's 2165 magnification range is wide enough to let you start a trek with a low-power view for scanning a meadow, then crank up to 65 when a hawk hovers on a distant pine. In practice, that flexibility translates into fewer lenses in your pack. I found myself pulling the magnification knob a few times on a single outing, and each step felt smooth, no sudden jumps that make it hard to keep the target in frame. What really stood out during the early morning birding session was the level of detail the scope delivered. Even at 21, the plumage on a common yellow warbler was crisp enough to see individual feather edges, and at 65 a great horned owl perched 300 meters away still showed a clear outline of its facial disc. That kind of incredible detail recognition is what separates a high-end glass piece from a budget alternative that often looks soft or grainy at higher powers. The image stayed bright enough that I didn't have to strain my eyes, which is a subtle but important point when you're out in the low light of dawn. The angled eyepiece design is another practical win for field use. Because the eye sits lower than a straight tube scope, you can rest the scope on a branch, a rock, or even a trekking pole, and still get a comfortable viewing position without having to crane your neck. On a steep ridge, that meant I could keep the scope steady on a small rock ledge while my hands were free to adjust the focus. The lightweight construction, the Endura feels more like a high-end binocular than a traditional spotting scope, made that kind of improvisation feel natural rather than a balancing act. Now, no product is perfect, and the Endura has a few trade-offs that matter depending on your priorities. The biggest one is price. SWAROVSKI optics sit in the premium tier, and the Endura is no exception. If you're a casual hobbyist who only goes birding a few times a year, the cost can feel steep compared to a solid 20-30 binocular that would get the job done most of the time. That said, the value you're buying into is durability and long-term performance. The scope's housing is weather-sealed, and I tested it on a sudden rain shower without any fogging or moisture ingress. For someone who plans to leave the scope out in the elements week after week, that endurance is a tangible cost saver. You're less likely to need a replacement or costly repairs down the line. Another nuance is low light performance at the top end of the magnification range. Because the Endura uses a relatively modest objective size to keep the weight down, the image does dim a bit when you push past 50 in dusk conditions. I noticed the background of a forest clearing became darker, making it a little harder to distinguish a far-off deer silhouette against the fading light. If you hunt or bird watch primarily at twilight, you might want to consider a scope with a larger objective lens, or a separate low-light accessory like a reticle with illumination. That's not a flaw in the scope itself, just a design choice that favors portability and flexibility over absolute night performance. So who should actually buy the Endura? If you are an avid birder, a hunter who needs to move quickly across varied terrain, or a nature photographer who wants to scout a landscape before setting up a shot, the combination of magnification range, lightweight angled design, and weather resilience makes a lot of sense. The scope shines when you need to transition from wide area scanning to a high-detail close-up without swapping equipment. It's also a solid fit for someone who already trusts SWAROVSKI's reputation and wants a product that will stay reliable for years. Who should skip it? If you spend most of your time in a fixed location, say, a backyard wildlife feeder, or a static observation blind, and you don't need the full 65 reach, a smaller, less expensive spotting scope, or a pair of high-end binoculars might give you similar clarity for a fraction of the price. Likewise, if you hunt primarily at night, you'll benefit more from a scope specifically engineered for low light gain, perhaps with